we speak about mazel. Mazel has to do with the zodiac. Each person, when he's born, you're born under a certain star. And although we speak, at one time, astrology was a very sophisticated science to be able to read the stars. It's a forgotten science. So they speak about, are you this or you're that? It's all a bunch of nonsense. At best, it's an infinitesimal part of what used to be, what they understand. But a person was an expert astrologer, as Avram Avinu was, an expert astrologer. You were able to read the stars. You knew what the events which took place in the world, and even future events. That's reading the stars. The Talmud tells us Shmuel was one of the greatest rabbis who were interpreters of the Mishnah, was an expert in astrology. And the Gemara says, the Talmud says, he lived in Iraq, in ancient Babylon. And he says that he understood the pathways of the stars the way he understood the roadways and the alleyways in Pumbedisa. Pumbedisa was a certain section in Iraq. The way he knew and was adept and was acquainted with all the alleyways in Pumbedisa, that's how acquainted he was with the pathways of the stars. That's how well he was able to read the stars. And he says, makes an interesting comment, that anybody who's able to read the stars and does not, you're turning your back on God. Because the stars, God is communicating very important, vital messages to the world. So how do you turn your back on that? So therefore, it's like almost like denying God, that if you're able to read the stars and you don't, it's like denying God. It's like you're shutting God out. That's Shmuel's statement. So each of us is born under a star. For instance, the Talmud tells us that if you're born under a star called the red star, that person is destined to be one or two things. Either a murderer, bloodthirsty. So what should he do? He should engage to become either a moel or a shochid, a ritual slaughterer. That's how he should expend that inclination towards slaughtering animals and circumcising children. Today, you'd say you become a surgeon. That's the way you do it. Because that's the person's inclination, he's drawn towards that. The Gemara tells a story that there was a certain person, she gave birth to a boy, and it was a very special family, and it said he'd be a criminal, a gangster, taking material which is not his, of other people. So the mother went to the rabbi and says, what should I do? She says, make sure that your child's head is always covered. Why does a Jew always walk with his head covered and does not go bareheaded? So the Talmud says, the Gemara says, because when you keep your head covered, it's an indication of subservience. You acknowledge that there's God above you, and when you stand in the presence of God, it's humility. You cover your head. It's inappropriate to go in God's presence with a bareheaded. So the covering engenders humility. That's why a Jew goes with his head covered. It's not a law, it's a custom. You go with your head covered for that reason. So the rabbis had advised this woman whose son was born under the star, which indicated he would be a criminal, that he take things which are not his illegally. She should always make sure his head is covered from the day he's born, and by that will guarantee that'll keep him in check. So the Talmud says he already was an Amora. He was a great rabbi. And as he was studying under a tree, which did not belong to him, a fruit tree, accidentally the wind came and blew off his head covering. The moment his head covering was blown off, immediately he was climbing the tree to steal the fruit. Could you imagine? It's like almost like a person, God forbid, is an addict. drug addict. The moment he starts craving, he loses control. That's how overwhelming this drawer was to stealing. You keep his head covered, it's in check. The moment it's uncovered, it's like letting, I don't want to use the word genie out of the box, out of the bottle. It's like the monster out of the bottle. That's what you're doing. So each of us is born under a star, many things. Intelligence-wise, wealth-wise, health-wise, success-wise, many things. But that star has relevance to every aspect of that person's life. And you function within those parameters. Each of us has that. But there are other stars which are not specific to an individual. Every person has is what they say, he hopes, a lucky star. When you have a child born among Jews, what do we say? We say mazel tov. We wish the child to have a good mazel. And by people, multiple people wishing that person, that will impact that whatever that star is, it should only have the most positive effect on that person. So that's what we say mazel tov. There's an expression, he has a bad mazel. He's fallen on hard luck. It's hard luck. I remember many years ago, there was a certain woman, she was ready in her 40s, 45, she wasn't married. So she came to Rabbi Pinto, and Rabbi Pinto said to her, your mazel is locked. Those are the words he said to her. Your mazel is locked. And I'm not sure how to open up the mazel, that you should be able to get married. She was early to mid 40s. I was there, she broke down crying. She said, Rabbi, what should I do? He thought. Today, thank God she's married for about 20 years more. She said, what should I do? Didn't know. Then he went and he took a lock, opened the lock. This is based on Kabbalistic. Just take the open lock and take it and throw it into the river and say something. That's what he told her to do. Hopefully, by doing that action, the lock is open, that will allow your mazel to open up to be able to find your mate, your soulmate. Did it work immediately? No, but eventually she met her husband. She never had children, this woman. But that's the story. So every Jew has a mazel, but you have the mazel which relates to personally. Now you have a general mazel. The zodiac, for instance, you live in a country, and the country itself has prosperity. You have food. There's no famine. People are healthy. So that's a general mazel, because the stars give off that areas under that, the dominance of those stars, that the world exists. That the world is not coming apart at it seems, which today it is. That's a general mazel. This is the concept. But he says, even mazel, what is the mazel? Very interesting. This is already what I'm telling you now is Kabbalistic. Everything in the physical world is the manifestation of something in the spiritual world, which energy is released, and it goes on the number of processes until it finally manifests itself in the physical. So the physical is a reflection of spiritual energy being processed ultimately to evolve into something physical. So that means we ourselves, that we live and exist as physical beings, there is a counterpart which corresponds to every bit of our being in the spiritual sense. And when that spiritual energy manifests itself into the physical world, you have a physical body with so many limbs and so many arteries and so many bones. All that's a manifestation of all those forces. Every blade of grass has an energy which makes sure that blade grows. You have species, all kinds of species, domesticated, undomesticated. Every one of the species has an energy behind it to allow it to manifest itself into that physical being, physical species. Whether it's living species, whether it's plant kingdom species, whether it's inanimate, whatever it is, there is a spiritual counterpart for that to come about. How many stars are there in the galaxies? Waters on the infinite. How many blades of grass are there in this world? How many granules of sand are there? If everything itself needs a spiritual counterpart, that means what do the stars do? The stars are part of the processing that when the energy goes through the stars, those stars have an impact that energy manifests itself in the physical sense, in the physical world. The sand, the water, species of fish, whatever it is, everyone is a different energy. When it goes through that process center called stars, it's converted into the physical. So how much physical has to be converted? A lot of physical. You have 8.5 billion people. You have a food chain. You have edible, inedible, unlimited amount of animals, different species, birds, fish, reptiles, insects. There's no end to it. The stars are the process extended, everything that comes in this world. So if you could read the stars and you're good at it, you could read all the events that are meant to take place. You could read it in the stars. As a result of that, let's say God wants to change the setting of existence. That means God releases other energies. So now when you read the stars, the processing mechanism called stars, something else is happening. So the stars only process the energies that God offers or releases, but what is going now, this and some other time something else. Today there's prosperity in the world. Other times there was famine. There was plague. There were dark ages. Why? You know what the answer is? Only God knows. Because as we discussed yesterday, everything that God does is the ultimate objective is to come to a certain conclusion. That conclusion is called perfection. The world should be ready for real time. It has to evolve and develop into something which God says at that point, we're ready for his presence to enter this existence. That's what it's about. So we speak about Mazol, the star, it's specifically the individual, and each person's one star has no bearing on someone else's star. And then you have general stars, which provide all the amenities for existence to exist. Because without them, it can't exist. Without oxygen, it can't exist. Without water, the world can't exist. Without temperature, the sun has to be a certain distance from the world. If it's too far, it would freeze. If it's too close, it will be totally incinerated. All this, these balances, at certain times in history, climate control, right? What determines that? Also, it's the way God wants to release those energies, the type of energy, which is processed through that processing mechanism, which is called the zodiac, the stars themselves. There's a zodiac, and then you have endless more stars, which support that system during that particular period of time. So this is the concept of divine providence, God's interaction with existence, what God wants to achieve. Man should perfect himself. The world should be perfected. Ultimately, God's glory will become irrefutably obvious and present, which is what time of the coming of Mashiach. When the world will reach its level of so-called perfection. Now we want to discuss the laws of prophecy. A human being is able to prophesy. What is prophecy? People think, what's prophecy? A prophet could tell you the future. That's not what prophecy is. That's not the essence of prophecy. Prophecy is God communicates with man. That's all it means. That although the human being is physical, but what is the component within the human being that God communicates to, God connects to? It's called the soul. Everything we process with our physical faculties, the brain, the neurological system, our body, it's physical. When we understand things, it's with the chemical activity in the brain. When God communicates to a prophet, it doesn't go through any of the physical parts of the body. It's a direct connection to the soul. The soul being totally spiritual, when God communicates to the prophet, it's like he locks into that soul and he communicates whatever he chooses to communicate to that person. Most prophets do not pass on what they receive. It's for them themselves to know. Most prophets. How many prophets do we have that we're aware of? The Gemara tells us that when the Jews left Egypt, there were 1,200,000 prophets. Do we know what they prophesied? And nothing to do with it wasn't to communicate for future generations. We have prophets that their objective and their value was they received communications for future generations, that future generations be aware of God's position on many things, what the perspective should be. Most prophets, it's on a very personal level. A person that's worthy, God will communicate to him how he should be able to achieve perfection. He gives you insights because you're worthy of that. He gives you assistance to achieve that. He gives you responsibilities to embark on certain projects. And the reason why you're able to succeed in those projects is because God's your backer. God's backing you. And that's the majority of prophets. You have new understandings of truth. Prophecy is not divine inspiration. The Ramchal in the Way of God distinguishes between the two of them. Divine inspiration is a person who's spiritualized to a great degree. Today we have no prophecy. After the destruction of the first temple and the beginning of the second temple, there were only 3 prophets that were left. They're called the latter prophets, and when they passed away, the era of prophecy came to an end. Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi were the last 3 prophets. After that, there's no longer prophecy, but there's something called divine inspiration. What's divine inspiration? You have people that are phenomenally intelligent, and people grasp things due to their IQ and experience. They grasp it fully, and they have a clear understanding, and they relate to it, and they can put the teeth into it. That's how almost tangible it is. Divine inspiration surpasses that endless times over. A person who's spiritually attuned to this, God will put an idea, a thought, a truth in your mind, and when you experience that truth, you understand you've never experienced a level of clarity at such an absolute level as that moment. Nothing's comparable to it. And as much as somebody would try to discourage you or refute it, it's locked in. It's more than etched in stone. It's a level of clarity which there's nothing compares to it. Even more than when you meet a person and you recognize him, at the times maybe you question, is it him? Maybe somebody who resembles him. When God gives that person that understanding, whatever it may be, it's a level of understanding. There's no ifs or buts. It is exactly what it is. And because of its suddenness, comes suddenly to the person, without any preparation, without any calculation, without any due diligence. It's just put in your mind. that person who's experienced it knows this is divine prophecy. I want to talk about a person who's hallucinating. No person. I had a dream. A lot of people had dreams. Not talking about a dream. We're talking about something which is absolute, direct to the person, and he has a sense of its truth, its veracity, irrefutably clear, and there's nothing but this. I'll give you an example, just historically speaking. It was when the Nazis, Yimach Shmam Zikram, they took over Poland. Rav Chaim Ozer Gruzinski, who was the chief rabbi of Vilna, which was in Lithuania, and was recognized as the leading Torah sage of the world. He sent out a communication to all these yeshivas that were in Poland and that were in Russia. They should all travel to Vilna. Why? Because Vilna was Lithuania, and Lithuania was a free zone. It wasn't controlled by the Russians. It wasn't controlled by the Nazis. This is before the Nazis took over Vilna, took over with Lithuania. And he says every yeshiva should come, and you had thousands of yeshiva students and teachers, exceptional, came to Vilna. And each yeshiva had an office, which was the administration of that yeshiva, to provide whatever they had to provide for the students. Food, clothing, travel information, where they're going next. They know they're not staying in Vilna. They can be traveling. Where are we traveling to? So there's a story, because it had to do with my mashgiach, who's my Rebbe. The Mir Yeshiva had 400 visas to travel to a certain location, which they believed was a safe haven. To flee from the Nazis, they'll be protected if they go to that country. Yechezkel Levenstein, who was the mashgiach of the Mir, was a man who was divinely inspired. He's a man who was feared because of his level of holiness. And he says to my mashgiach, who's his closest student, he says, I want you to go to the office where these 400 visas are, and I want you to destroy every visa. Could you imagine? The average age of a student in the Mir Yeshiva was between the age of, was 20 to 35. We're not talking about children. He had adults. And Rabbi Cheskel Levenstein gives the order to my mashgiach, who was a man then maybe in his early 20s, go destroy every visa. Why? Because if they have the visas, they're going to travel there. And if they travel there, they're going to be killed. They're going to be going into a trap of the Nazis. As much as they believe. That's what he says. How does he know it? Did he have some kind of personal communication? Somebody informed him. But he says that's the reality. Therefore, he went, destroyed all 400 visas. Could you imagine? Here, they understand visa is a question of life and death. And the rabbi says, destroy the visas. They only strung him up. You took away our ticket to life. We may all perish through the Nazis because you destroyed these visas. And they were livid. They were up in arms. How does the rabbi do such a thing? 4 days pass, where if they would have had the visas, they would have arrived at a certain location. Word gets back to whoever went there were killed by the Nazis. And this story repeated itself many times during the war, and he directed them where to travel and not to travel. And he said it with absoluteness. How did he know? It's not that, he was involved with the American government and they were giving him all this information through their recognizance and through their network. How he knew? Because God put the thought in his mind. Ruach HaKodesh. Just conclude with a story. The Jews spent 4 years in Shanghai during the war, the Mir Yeshiva. And he was the mashgiach. And when they come, there were about 500 students. You need a very large location for them to study. Plus, you need other facilities where they could eat, this, sleep. They found residences in Shanghai where they could sleep. Where did they eat? That it shouldn't interfere with their studies. They had another very large hall. It was a very old warehouse, which was built like a cavern, and that's where he studied. One day he comes to the Beis Medrash and he says, where they were studying, he says, everybody has to vacate immediately. Immediately. Why? Because if they don't vacate, their lives will be in jeopardy. They know what he was talking about. The building will seem to be as sturdy as anything. He says, everybody must vacate. And if the rabbi said vacate, you vacate. Because he was a holy rabbi. They vacate the building. 20 minutes later, the building collapses. This is recorded during World War II. How do you know it's going to collapse? When I was sitting shiva for my father on the Lower East Side where my parents lived, so there was a rabbi, his name is Rabbi Pivovitz. Rabbi Pivovitz was a student of the Mir Yeshiva in Shanghai. And he was a short man. And he comes, my father was very close with him. My father used to help him out financially because the rabbi, although he's a rabbi, he was a teacher, he couldn't support his family. So my father would always continuously help him out financially that he could make ends meet. And he comes to the Shiva to pay a Shiva visit, and he was there when the Allies attacked Shanghai. You understand? They bombed Shanghai because it was a major city. So logically, what should you do? You go out to the country. Because the country, they're not bombing the country area. They're bombing the city itself. Chatzkel, Rabbi Levenstein said to the students, any student who stays in Shanghai in the building is safe. You go out to the country, I can't guarantee your safety. You may be killed. So he was telling me this rabbi who came to pay the Shiva call. He says it was unbelievable. When you walked in the street and the bombs were falling like birds were falling from the sky. That's the way the American bombers and the RAF, Royal Air Force, they were bombing. They were falling from the sky. The students, they would go from the Beis Medrash to their residence where they slept. It's like they walked between raindrops. Not one student was injured or killed. There was a few students who went out to the country. They weren't killed, but they were hurt very badly through shrapnel, whatever it was. How does he know this? The answer is he had divine inspiration. God put it in his mind factually. It's a level of clarity which is absolute truth, irrefutable truth. Therefore, he can take responsibility, even though 500 people's lives are at stake, or 1,000, it doesn't make a difference. It's fact. There's no area of question. That's what we call Ruach HaKodesh. That's divine inspiration. Tell you endless stories, people that we knew, and I quote, people who had this. Rav Steinman. Rabbi Steinman, who I mentioned, there's a book you should read. I suggest it strongly. It's published by Art Scroll just within the past year. It's an unbelievable book. You got to read it. He's a man, which I knew him very well. But as well as I knew him, after reading the book, I realized how much I didn't know about him. Because he was a very humble, modest person, did not display who he really was. So as much as you knew who he was, you didn't really know who he was. That's how special he was. Rav Steinman. It's called Rabbi Steinman. So I used to take groups of people, my students, we used to visit Israel. We did it about 4 or 5 times. In the winter, we'd leave on a Saturday night, catch a 12 o'clock flight out of Kennedy, We'd land on Sunday. We would tour Israel for 4 days. We'd rise every morning. We'd be at the sunrise minyan at the Kotel. And then we'd start traveling. We visit all the Torah leaders in Israel. And I had relations with everyone. And we'd go spend time every one of them. Whether it was Rebbe Yoshev, Zech Tzarech Livrocha, Rav Steinman, Rav Chaim Kanevsky, Rav Chaim Greineman, Rabbi Chluda Lefkowitz, these people. So I had one, and then we'd come back, either land Thursday morning or Friday morning on the way back. And we travel, visit kibbutzim, we travel Israel from one end to another. All the outreach programs which I was involved in, all these different things. It was a phenomenal trip. Till today, these people still speak about the trip, and they're always asking me, when are we going to do it again? So I say, you arrange the trip, I'll go. I don't have time to arrange it, and my energies are better placed elsewhere. You want to arrange it, arrange it. So I was like shocked. We came to Rav Steinman, and Rav Steinman, he would speak to the group. Then afterwards, each person would come to him and ask for a personal blessing. And when he gave a blessing, he would hold their hand and give them a blessing, like shake their hand. One person comes who's a Baal Tshuva. And I explained to Rav Steinman who the person was. Rav Steinman wasn't that impressed. Didn't show he was impressed. And afterwards, he asked him for a blessing. This person asked Rav Steinman. And Rav Steinman doesn't take his hand. Doesn't take his hand. To me, it didn't make any sense. Wouldn't shake his hand. And the blessing he gave him was just like off-the-cuff blessing. Wasn't focused on it, went off. So afterwards, I went to a person and said, don't be discouraged. He may have had a long day, he may have been distracted, whatever it was. But I had no idea why. And I wasn't going to ask Rabbi Steinman why not. Fast forward to 2 years ago. There's a Chabad Moel who does most of the bris in Crown Heights and travels. He says to me, guess what? Last week, I circumcised this person. This is the person. I never knew he wasn't circumcised. Rav Steinman, when he got within the proximity of Rav Steinman knew he wasn't circumcised. At the time, the person was about 37 years old. Rav Steinman didn't shake his hand. Hello?